And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi. Joining me, as always, is contributor Shayne Kubas. We tried to do this thing yesterday, Shayne, and the internet just wasn't allowing it for us. And so we're going to try the podcast today, our first Thursday episode of the Still Curtain podcast. But we've got a show for you today that's going to include future Steelers bets and maybe the ones that you should make as well. We're going to go down through those. Some of them are future players bets, and some of them are team related. So very interesting. Let's first talk about, though, some of the things that have been happening in the news. News is obviously really slow this time of year, Shayne, but we found out that the Watt brothers are on the Wheaties box. So that's something, at least. First pair of brothers to ever make it together. There have been joint athletes on the box before, but you go and look at Wikipedia or wherever you want to look for the history of the Wheaties box athletes. There's some pretty impressive players on there, and across all sports, all different things. Shaun White, just all sorts of
Tiger Woods
sports
is a
athletes.
personal favorite
Tiger
one,
Woods, yep. Shaquille O'Neal. So whatever you want to do there. Lots of athletes to make the box, and now the Watt brothers are on it. And just in case you were interested, there were some Steelers to make it in the past. I had that list, and I can't remember what I did with it, but it was Rod Woodson, Merrill Hodge. And then in back-to-back years, it was Franco Harris and Joe Green that made it in the 80s, actually. So,
makes sense.
Yeah. Edge defender rankings, Shayne. These are coming out just recently here. And as the days go on, more rankings are released.
Yep.
Jeremy Fowler of ESPN is comprising his top 10 rankings of each position leading up to NFL training camps here. And he's not doing it alone. He's got help from NFL executive, players, and coaches, giving some input here and helping him comprise these rankings. Well, the Edge rankings were released, Shayne, earlier this week, and TJ Watt came in fourth. I know you released a short on this with your thoughts already. What do you make of the Edge rankings real quick, again, for those who didn't catch the short? And do you think that Watt was fairly placed?
So I think the problem with this ultimately, and I think what happens a lot, especially with players more so than maybe front office executives or coaches, is when a player is at the top of their game and they miss some time due to injury, or maybe they don't have quite the season that they usually do. There's a tendency to kind of overcorrect and put guys who maybe had elite seasons, like everyone ahead of him did, above that player, even if historically that player had either been more productive or just a better player. So him ranking fourth doesn't really surprise me so much. I think the thing that does surprise me is the fact that his lowest ranking was seventh from somebody. That's really, because even if you're overcorrecting for injury or, other guys maybe you think really had great seasons that can propel them past him, seven, I just don't understand how you can find six guys that play edge that would be better than TJ. Obviously, there's at least one person who voted him as number one edge still as well. So it's just kind of the spread is what more surprised me. I think they will end up beating that fourth ranking by the end of the season if he's healthy, just because of how much he does for the team, not just pass rushing, but everything else as well. But all the guys ahead of him, I mean, they had great seasons, admittedly. And Nick Bosa obviously won Defensive Player of the Year, so you kind of have to rank him very high. I don't know if he'll necessarily be at that level every year or anything like that, but he did have a special season, so you got to give him a lot of credit. We've had the Myles Garrett versus TJ Watt talk, whatever. We're not going to get into that right now. And then Micah Parsons is kind of the one that's like, okay, he's the up-and-comer. He's the new one. He's going to play full-time edge this year. How much better is he? Is he better or is he less effective because he's playing edge full-time? We'll have to see what that looks like, but all those guys did have great seasons and mostly healthy seasons, and that's probably why they're ranked where they are.
Yeah, not at all surprised to see those three names. I mean, they were healthy last year and they played at a high level. And that's the difference between them and TJ Watt, really, is TJ Watt was not healthy, had the pec tear in week 1, didn't play again until week 10. And so I guess the only argument you can make there, Shayne, is the Steelers were awful without him, and they allowed roughly a touchdown more per game. And so if you look at it that way, I mean, his impact is huge, but it is hard to rank him high if we're looking at just a 1-year list. Although if we're projecting forward, it's reasonable to say, yeah, Watt can be back on top like he was in the previous year. And I don't think that would come to a shock to anybody either if that were to be the case. And so, but ranking 7th is just too low. I mean, it's just too low. Really assuming Watt is healthy, you can't pick 7 people here. I know you can get like Max Crosby, Hassan Reddick. Like, who else are you putting in there that you think is going to realistically be better than Watt, assuming both of these guys are healthy? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, if you want to say, like, there's definitely a tier of edge rushers that like the top four are all guys that
Mhm.
any given year, I think you could make the argument to be the best edge in the NFL right now.
Yeah.
And then like Max Crosby's right on that fringe where I think that he is worthy of that conversation as well. And then you have other guys who have had elite seasons or who just had one, but haven't been there long enough and done it long enough. Like a Hassan Reddick, for example. He's been a great pass rusher for the past couple of years, but this was his first like true like okay, all pro type of season. If he
Mhm.
can sustain that, then you can start having him in that conversation. But it's really those at best top five guys you could really have an argument for ranking in the top two or three. So
Yeah, definitely. And going on along with this list here from ESPN, Pro Football Focus just released their edge list as well. TJ Watt was also fourth on their list behind the same three names,
yeah,
Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons, and Nick Bosa. And in that one, they ranked 1 through 32. So
yeah.
Highsmith, Alex Highsmith was actually in tier 5, as they described, the lowest tier of their top 32, and he was the 32nd overall edge player. Shane, I don't know if you got a chance to look at that list or not. Do you think that that is fair for Highsmith?
I mean, I haven't got a chance to look at the list, but overall, if technically, if we're putting him as he would be the worst edge one in that situation, I guess, if he was the first edge on your team.
Mhm.
I think I'd give him a little bit more credit than that, but I understand that like he is an edge two on his own team and for good reason. But I think if he was the edge one on a team that had a little bit more health, or at least someone else that plays edge that isn't Malik Reed last year, I think he still produces not the exact same numbers he did once Watt came back, but still a very solid season. So I think I'd have him closer to the top 25 just because I don't see a lot of true edge one types in the NFL right now outside of those top,
Mhm.
10, 15 guys. So I think you can start having arguments about guys after that, but his skill set, because of the fact that he has added a lot to it, his spin move is elite. He has the bend around the edge. Like I think he has the profile of a guy who could be at least a solid edge one for a team that didn't have TJ Watt. So I think you kind of have to put him closer into that 25-ish tier better.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, there were multiple teams that didn't have a representative on the list at
Not
all. For
surprising
so
right
for
now
the
with the way
Steelers to
that
have
is.
two,
Yeah,
it's good, and
it is.
at
Yeah,
least it's Highsmith is getting on the map here. I think
he
people are
is.
starting to
Yes.
recognize he
Yeah.
had 14 and a half sacks, led the league with 5 forced fumbles last year.
Hmm.
If he can put together a repeat performance, Shane, that'll get people talking. And so
Oh yeah,
I'll
for
be
sure.
interested to see a year from now where he ends up on these lists. And just a few other quick hitters right here we don't have in our notes, but just recently, Minka Fitzpatrick was rated the number 1 safety by
Hmm.
ESPN's panel. And Pat Fryermuth was rated the number 9 tight end. So an interesting one there. I thought he would come in the 6 or 7 range. He ends up coming in just a little bit lower than that. So go check those out if you get a chance.
Absolutely.
Shane,
Yeah.
we're going to shift gears here. And as we're doing that, if you were dropping in the chat, please leave us a note, a question in the live chat here. We'd love to be able to answer your questions. We're going to talk about, we've been doing our outlooks at each position,
Yeah.
and we're just going position by position here as we lead up to training camp. We're on the offensive line now, Shane, and I want to talk about this unit as a whole. We're going to make some of our predictions here. So let's first kick it off with who is making the roster for this Steelers offensive line. Obviously, a lot can change throughout training camp, and this is one of the hardest groups to predict because there are so many people and moving parts involved here. So if you were to give your prediction of which players are making the offensive line here, who do you think that's going to be for the Steelers?
So without getting into who will be the starting five, I think from the tackle position, you're going to have Broderick Jones, Dan Moore Jr., and of course Chuma Okorafor.
Mhm.
It, so those three should be the only tackles in my opinion. I don't think any of these other
Yeah.
tackles really need to be on the roster. I'd like another tackle type on the roster, but I don't think you're
Mhm.
going to get more than that. Assuming one of whoever doesn't win the left tackle battle will be the six, swing tackle type of guy. And then at guard, you got Steamolo, of course. I do think, of course, James Daniels, Nate Herbig. I think Kevin Dotson is a sneaky guy that might not make this team, whether it's a trade for like a late round
Mhm.
pick or just a straight up cut if he isn't better than Herbig. I think that's certainly possible. It kind of just depends on how many linemen they want to keep. If it's eight, it really gets dicey. If it's nine, I think he has a really
Mhm.
solid shot to stay on. And then, of course, you have Mason Cole. And then the wild card, and it's really based on what he does in camp and if he looks like he can be a solid backup center. Is
Mhm.
Kendrick Green going to make another roster? Is he going to stay around at least on this team in some fashion this year? Because he's got to make it as a center. We talked about this. He's not going to be a guard. He's not going to be an even swing interior piece. You can't really play him at guard, I don't think. Unless he shows improvement as a center prospect, I don't think that he's going to make the roster. But he's the only, other than Spencer Anderson, that, was drafted this year as well. He's the only guy that has center capability technically on this team, at least one other than James Daniels, but you don't want him to have to move off guard after how well he's played. So he's really got to make it work if he wants a chance, but I'm going to guess he doesn't.
Yeah, it's really interesting because Green is a guy I would have never given a shot to
No.
just a few months back. And then we saw
Exactly.
him at
Yeah.
OTAs with a true position change. Like he was operating
Yeah.
as a second team center behind Mason Cole. So we have to assume that that's going to continue throughout training camp. And so there's just no real competition there. And so that definitely throws a curveball in my initial roster predictions, because now I would say that he's in the inside looking out rather than the outside looking in as
At
the
least
fast
right
track
now.
to
Yeah.
the Steelers need a primary backup center. And if they don't think that Nate Herbig is a guy that can play
Which
there for
I'd
a
rather
couple
not
games.
ask him to do that. Yeah. I'd
Yeah,
rather
and I
not.
agree. I think he's better as a guard. And if you don't think he can play in like a 2 to 4 game stint or whatever, if Cole were to get injured, or for a whole season, if you were to go down with an ACL tear or something crazy like that, because the Steelers have been so fortunate health-wise, we can't assume that that's going to continue. If they think that Green is the true center prospect behind him, then maybe he does have a track there. But I agree with you, Shayne, on the offensive tackles. I think they only keep 3. That's something that they've done historically.
Yeah.
And I don't see a fourth that's like, oh, we got to keep this guy
The Raven
around.
Clark is the best bet, and he's a veteran that hasn't stopped.
And he's an
long,
older
so.
veteran. I mean,
Yeah.
he's a long guy, but I think that they would rather go the route of, we'll promote somebody from the practice squad, or we'll go out and get somebody in the event of an injury. Let's just keep 3 tackles on the roster. And I think that that's what's going to happen again. Those obviously being Broderick Jones, Chukwuma Okorafor, and then Dan Moore. And I'll be interested to see if they allow for a competition at the right tackle there, or if they're probably just going to let it play out. We'll get to that in just a second.
Yeah.
Guards. This team is suddenly very deep at guard. And like you alluded to already, Kevin Dotson could get the axe because of that. Now, I personally, Shayne, I think that Dotson, being a youngish guy, didn't come into the league super young, but a youngish guy, still on his rookie deal. He's too good of a player to just flat out cut, I think. But
that's kind of what I'm thinking.
There are also whispers that this guy just rubs the coaching staff the wrong way too, and doesn't always say the right things. And so if that's the case and the competition's close enough, and Herbig, we obviously assume, is a guy that's going to make the roster and probably be that swing backup guard, it could make him in kind of an iffy spot. But I agree. I think the most likely route is either he's the bottom of the roster, last offensive lineman of the group. Maybe he doesn't get a hat on game days, and they only call him up in the event of an injury. Or maybe they do try to deal him at some point. I'll be interested to see what happens there. So, Shayne, let's shift from who makes the roster over to who will be the starting 5. I know this is what people care about more so than who your 7th, 8th, potentially 9-man is going to be on the roster. What's the starting 5 going to look like? Let's do it this way, Shayne. What's it going to look like at the beginning of the season, and what's it going to look like halfway through? Is it going to be the same for you, or are you going to have a different prediction?
So I do think that there's still a pretty solid shot that, unless Broderick Jones really shows out in camp, especially once that gets going and in the preseason, I think they'll try to slow play him at least a little bit, because he is a young guy still, doesn't have as much experience as a lot of, tackles would have coming out of college. Although his experience in college is very good and very successful, it's still a situation where I think that unless Dan Moore shows regression or shows that he just can't hold down left tackle like he couldn't for parts of last year, that they're at least going to give him the opportunity to, win that job and then lose it if he doesn't play well. I think that's what's going to happen. So I think Dan Moore Jr. will be the left tackle week 1. I think, of course, Mason Cole will be the center. Isaac Seumalo will be the left guard. James Daniels right guard, of course, and then Chukwuma Okorafor will be the right tackle at first. And then that's where it gets interesting, because I think halfway through the season, unless Dan Moore is playing out of his mind and Broderick Jones just isn't beating him out, or he just isn't, again, just not giving them a reason to take him out, you could see Broderick Jones slot in at right tackle, but I'd rather him play left and just stick it left.
Mm-hmm.
But if Broderick Jones does come in and beat out Moore for the left tackle spot at some point, depending on how Okorafor is playing, do they give the nod to a guy that, as much as Okorafor is still a young player by the standards of a player at his point in his career, because of how young he was when he came in, Moore Jr. should have more theoretical, room to grow at this point. Do they slot him in at right tackle and make Okorafor the 6th man? That's kind of, I think, the biggest question. I don't expect anything else as far as movement goes unless there's an injury. Both the interior guys, all 3 of the interior guys are veterans who you kind of know what to expect from. It's really the tackles that could see a lot of movement.
Yeah, and that's definitely possible. Now, you talk about Broderick Jones potentially moving. I am not in favor of
Exactly.
that at all, Shane.
Exactly. That's why I'm saying I don't think it'll happen. I think it would have to be more switching to right tackle if
No,
that
but I
happens.
can see, yeah, I can see a scenario where it's like, oh, somebody gets injured or whatever, and Dan Moore's not comfortable. I just don't want it to happen. I'll say that.
Me
I'm
either.
not,
Yeah, I
this
don't
isn't
want
a
it to happen
prediction.
either.
I just don't want it to happen because left tackle is one of the most important positions on your
Yes.
roster. You drafted a young left tackle who doesn't have a ton of experience to begin with. Stick him in one spot, let him learn. And if he's not
Exactly.
ready right away, let him get it eventually because that position is going to be very important. We want him to be the blindside protector for 10 years in Pittsburgh if he
Exactly.
turns out. So,
Yeah.
that position is important there. Now, as far as predictions go, I do think that there's a chance that we could see the same offensive line as last year, but swapping out Kevin Dotson
For
now for
CMLO.
Isaac Seumalo
Yeah.
at that left guard spot. I think that there's a chance that Dan Moore can start the year as the starting left tackle, and it might only be 2 or 3 games before they make
Yeah.
that switch, kind of like it was from Mitch Trubisky to Kenny Pickett last year, halftime of week 4. And so it could be a similar situation with the left tackle position. Obviously, the hope is that Broderick Jones can start from day one. It probably means that he's ready and he looks really good. So, but he is a raw player, so it wouldn't surprise me at all. The other thing that I would like to see, Shane, and so just to make my prediction here, I'm going to say that starting the year, we're looking at Dan Moore from left to right, Dan Moore, Isaac Seumalo, Mason Cole, James Daniels, and Chukuma Okorafor.
Right.
In a perfect world, Shane, I would love to be able to see a true competition between Okorafor and Dan Moore for that right tackle spot.
Right.
I know that Moore is not familiar with it at all. He didn't really play it at Texas A&M. He was a left tackle there. He's been a left tackle for the Steelers. But my reasoning, Shane, is that I think that Moore did take a step forward in the second half of last year. I think that Okorafor has kind of leveled off a little bit. We're talking about, even though he's still a pretty young guy, we're talking about a player who is entering his 6th NFL season now. And we've just not seen the growth from Okorafor that we need to see. Now, when it comes to Dan Moore, we're talking about a former 4th round pick, a guy who tested as a pretty good athlete. He's got the good length. Just looking at him, he's got the prototype traits that you'd want for the position. And on top of that, he's only entering his 3rd NFL season. And so I think the odds are more stacked in his favor that if one guy can be maybe a more long-term option as the starting right tackle, it's probably him. And in fact, the Steelers could look to get out of Okorafor's contract as early as 2024, where they could save $10 million. And so if they're having the future in mind at all, which they never do, Shane, this is the Steelers. It's all about winning here and now. But if they have the future in mind at all, make this a true competition. And if Okorafor is better, then play the guy. But if Dan Moore is comparably good and it's hard to decipher between the two, I'd love to see the guy that's a bit younger and the guy that has more years left on his rookie deal, that guy win that job. And then you can get this unit solidified and start building that chemistry again. But I agree with you. I've got the same prediction with Broderick Jones making that switch early in the season. It'll happen in the first half of the season, if not right away.
I think it will happen. If it happens at any point, it'll be early. I think what they're hoping for is one of two things. Either Broderick Jones plays too well to keep him off the field, even as a younger guy and a guy who does have some things to work on, and Dan Moore just can't compete. Or Dan Moore plays so well that they don't have a reason to make that switch early on, and then it takes either them wanting to get Jones in at left tackle and them saying, okay, we're going to move Moore Jr. over to right, which again, I think is the best move for the long-term future of the offensive line, is to see if he can stick there. Because we know whether it's this year, late in this year, early this year, whenever it is, that switch is coming. We know that Moore Jr. is not going to be the left tackle for this team at some point. Let's see if he can stick at right tackle and be at least a comparable player to what you're going to pay, like I said, $10 million or more for a core for if you want to keep him past this year. So.
Yep, I agree. And I think that going back to Kevin Dotson for a second, I think that he might be the most interesting moving part on this offensive line, just because you're talking about a guy still under a rookie contract, former 4th round pick. He's got about 2 combined years of starting experience. He could offer some value to a team, especially if a team were to suffer an injury at the guard position in training camp. You're still talking about a guy that you can get him for very cheap money-wise. And so in a perfect situation, Shane, knowing that Dotson is not going to be involved or very unlikely to be involved in the offense at any way at this point, because again, like we said, if an injury happens, it's probably going to be Herbig, the guy that's making $4 million, stepping up into that role instead of Dotson. And so knowing that Dotson's going to be buried, I think if you can scrap a 6th or 7th round pick out of him and flip him for that in a guy that's going into the final year of his rookie deal, get the draft pick, because it's not, I know that depth is great, but the likelihood that you have both of your starting guards get injured is probably not very good. And I think that I feel like everybody would view this differently. It's depending on the here and now, like, how concerned are you about depth? How important is the depth to you? And do you need to be 4 deep at guard? Can you get away with being 3 deep at guard? And if the worst case possible, can you bring up a guy? Can you go out and sign a guy that is at least comparable to what Kevin Dotson would give you if worse came to worse? So I think that's an interesting one. I'll be interested to see what the Steelers do with him there. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. Shayne, we're going to shift gears here to odds and predictions for the Steelers in the 2023 season. These odds are all from DraftKings Sportsbook. We're going to go right down through these, and I'm going to get your opinion on both of them, and we'll say if these are bets worth taking, bets not worth taking, steer clear of it, put some money on it, whatever you should do. And again, we can't guarantee anything here, but we've definitely got some insight on the Steelers, and so this is what we do. Shayne, first one is regular season wins for the Steelers this year. The over-under from DraftKings Sportsbook is 8.5. Now, the Steelers historically have not had a record below 500 under Mike Tomlin. So now we look at doing the simple math here. They play a 17-game schedule. If we do the under here, that would put them at 8 wins, and it would give Mike Tomlin his first losing season since he became head coach in 2007. So like this would break his 16-year streak of not having a winning season. Do you think that'll happen this year, or do you think that it is worth taking the over again and betting on Mike Tomlin again to come away with at least that 500 record or better?
Yeah, for a multitude of reasons that I'll talk about, I would be hammering this over. You just brought it up. This would 16 straight years of over 500, or at least 500 or better football. I don't think a season in which, granted, it's going to be a tough division and a tough AFC. I don't think a year in which they improved greatly upon the roster after a 9-8 season with a rookie quarterback starting most of the games. I can't imagine that this is the year that streak breaks. I could be wrong, of course, things happen in the NFL, but some things just seem inevitable. And this is one of those things, right? Where, like, if you're betting and you just want to see something go through, I know there's a lot of talk about, like, oh, you just got to see one hit. It's like, I know it doesn't work that way, but like, if you're one of those guys, if you want to see something hit, this is probably one of your better ones you could go ahead and throw at least a couple of dollars on, because this is just what he does. I mean, with worse teams than this, he's done more with it. So, like, you kind of have to bet on Tomlin at this point. He's one of the better bets in the sport for stuff like this.
Yeah, I mean, this team was able to scrap to a 500 record with Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges at quarterback.
Exactly.
And the roster is better since then. Now, I know the Steelers also had a terrific defense in that year, and I think the Steelers defense can get kind of more back on track to what it was
closer
in
to that,
2020.
least,
yeah, assuming that TJ Watt is healthy. That's obviously the biggest factor there. But the roster, the talent on the roster is just better overall than it has been the last couple of years. I think they made a lot of moves to progress in that direction. Their NFL draft is widely considered one of the 2 or 3 best drafts this year. We'll see what kind of impact it has right away. But then you've got young guys on offense who we can project taking another step forward. And Kenny Pickett, Pat Fryer with George Pickens, even Najee Harris behind an improved offensive line. And so it's hard to come away saying, yeah, the Steelers are going to get 8 wins or fewer this year, despite how difficult the division is. Knowing the quarterbacks in the division, it's hard, like you said, to bet against Mike Tomlin, who has just always done it and always seems to get his team at least in a position where they're in these 1-score games in a position to win. And so coming away victorious in the division, in these head-to-head matchups in the division is going to be a big part of that. But I agree with you, Shayne. Now, if we're getting real specific here, the odds, your odds going over, I think, are at minus 115, if I recall, and the odds going under are at plus 130. So you do get a little bit better payout if you bet the under. I'm just not willing to do that, Shayne. I mean, until it happens.
It's got to happen first. Once it happens, we can start talking about it. But
maybe Shayne, I'd be willing to bet against Tomlin if the Steelers roster, if they lost a lot of players during the offseason or has suffered some major injury going into the year. But there's no evidence to suggest that this team is going to be worse on paper. They could be worse in terms of their record in the 17-game schedule, but they shouldn't be worse on paper. And so I'm going over. Shayne and I both say over on the regular season wins. Place a bet. They're going 9 or better. Division wins, Shayne. This is where it gets a little bit trickier because 2.5 is exactly where I would have set the over under if I was the odds makers calling this shot right here, because the Steelers had 3 last year. This is such a tough division. And so how many wins could they possibly get? I don't see them getting over 3, Shayne, if I guess is what I need to say, because when you got a healthy Lamar Jackson now, you got Joe Burrow, who is good enough to sweep the Steelers. And then even Deshaun Watson now in his second season with the Browns, I see 4 as unreasonable. 3 is what they had last year. They ended up going 3-3. And that's what as good as anybody could have asked for considering the circumstances. Do they get to 3 this year, or are they just going to be under that mark? I think the number is 2 or 3. It's just, is it 2 or is it 3?
I think this is more fair to take the under on if you wanted to bet on one of these two. I do think, though, that splitting the series is always a good bet with this division, and not just the Steelers, but this division. Like,
yeah, it is.
I don't see, even if they, like, for example, if they, in years where if they get swept by, the Ravens, we'll say, they're probably going to beat the Browns both times and they'll split with the Bengals. Or if you're vice versa, like, something's going to happen where if it isn't a season split between each division opponent, it's going to be some combination that gets you to 3. It just kind of feels like that's what's going to happen. And I think it's going to be pretty similar for the rest of the division. Like, I don't expect anyone to go 5-1 in this division, or 4-2, like you said, is even really asking a lot, because every single one of these games you're going against a team that has the roster talent to beat you. Now, coaching comes into play, and quarterback play, obviously, we talked about with especially the 2 top guys, and then what you get from Watson. But it's really possible for all these teams to beat each other, really without making too hard of an argument. So I think asking for more than 3, it says definitely asking a lot from any of these teams. But I have a feeling it's going to be more likely to be a split than it is to be 2-4 or 1-5. So I would hesitate. I think it depends on, honestly, which one gives you the best odds is probably what you want to go with, because it's very likely that one of those 2 will happen, of course.
I think this one might have been even odds. I'd have to double check that.
That point, take your poison. I would still go 3, but it's up to.
I agree with you, Shayne. I'm going over again, and not because I think the Steelers are every bit on par with the Bengals and the Ravens. I do think that those teams are stronger right now, and I think that they've got the more proven quarterbacks. But you're talking about an NFL division. Like, these games can go anyway.
They can't. There's very few.
And that's what we've seen.
Like that.
Yeah. And historically, that's just the way it is. It's this cutthroat football that either team can come away. And you're talking about a lot of 1-score games that'll be decided by field goals. And so I do think that 3 is probably the right bet. This is one that, let's just put it this way, Shayne. If I was putting money on this bet, I wouldn't put a lot on it, because I don't feel very confident.
It's too iffy for that. Yeah.
So it's right where I would set the over under as well. And so if you're a betting person, you feeling confident on the Steelers, I do think that they get to 3, but they won't get any higher than that. I would be shocked if they got 4 wins, just because it would be so tough in that division. You got to sweep 2 teams. And so which 2 teams are you sweeping? I would assume the Browns are one of them. And then are you going to sweep the Ravens without Lamar Jackson? I don't think you sweep Joe Burrow. I think Burrow is the second best quarterback in the league right now. So
yeah, I think their best path is to sweep the Browns and to get one from each the Bengals and the Ravens. That would be
my prediction. If they got, that's true. If you get to 4 that way by splitting with Ravens and Bengals, and then you sweep the Browns, that's definitely possible. Just based on what we've seen over the past couple of years, though, I think a pretty even split is what should be predicted. I would say 3, but I'm not overly confident on that. Let's stick with the division here, Shayne, and let's talk about division winner odds, of which the Steelers are dead last in the division at plus 450. Browns are second to last at plus 425. Again, these odds are from DraftKings Sportsbook. Is it fair to have the Steelers as last in the division when it comes to odds?
I think so. I think I know why they are. I don't know how necessarily fair it is or isn't, but I think I know why. I think it's because, and probably for good reason, there's a perceived higher upside with the Browns, where even though they have a good chance of being worse than us because of their history and because of the uncertainty at quarterback still, they also have a higher potential because of their roster makeup and how they built their team. So like that's kind of where I think that comes from. Is I think if you were asked them to bet like who's third in division, the Steelers probably have a higher odds of that. But they probably, because this is division winner and not just where you're going to play,
Mhm.
it's an easier in your head to imagine the Browns, I think, getting hot, and if Watson plays up to his standard and everything else, they would have a better shot just talent wise to win the division than the Steelers do. So I understand it. I think that this is just a no bet. I don't think that you want to bet on this because again, you have two teams that you assume if everything goes right, if everything goes right for all four of these teams, the Browns still could have issues because again, Watson might never be himself again. But like clearly, the Ravens and Bengals, if everything goes right, they're just more talented at this point roster wise. And it's not like the coaching is terrible by any means. Zach Taylor's still kind of iffy to me, but he's made it work with all the talent.
Mhm.
You would have to kind of put the Steelers at least third, if not fourth, if everything goes perfectly, right? So having this happen is going to be very hard. It's just going to be hard to win enough games to win this division when you're facing
Mhm.
the AFC and you're not quite as talented as some other teams. We're definitely more of we can get into the wild card because we just can finish better than some other teams, and we can get some late wins in the season because of our coaching and because of our players. So I wouldn't bet this one. Let me put it that way. At least not any significant money.
Mhm. Yeah, your reasoning is spot on, Shane, and it was actually for the points that I was going to touch on because Deshaun Watson has been there before. He's had multiple seasons of 10 plus wins. He's been the Pro Bowl quarterback. He's had the 100 passer rating. And so the upside, the maximum upside of the Browns potentially is better if Watson plays like he did at his peak when he was in Houston. And so I don't think anybody should be arguing that. Watson was a really good quarterback then in those years. And he's only had a few games with the Browns so far. And we assume that it's going to get better. Now, what's interesting, Shane, is the Steelers, they were the 9-8 team last year, while the Browns were the 7-10 team. Not only that, but the Steelers finished the season 7-2. And so I think a lot of people were expecting the odds to maybe come in third this year, but I do think it's Vegas is betting on those the quarterbacks here, and they're betting on essentially Watson over Pickett. That's what Watson's going to lead his team to a little bit greater chance of winning the division. Not necessarily where these teams will finish, but a better chance of winning the division if he can suddenly explode again and be that Pro Bowl quarterback that he once was after taking
Right.
almost 2 years off. So I do agree with it in that sense. When we're talking about the Steelers as a division winner, would I take them at plus 450 odds? The simple answer is no, Shane. I'm
Yeah.
just not ready to do
So
that yet.
maybe a few bucks just for the fun of it,
Yeah,
but
if you
not a
want to throw
major
a few
bet.
bucks,
Yeah.
make it interesting for yourself. By all means, do it. You never know what can happen. Maybe Joe Burrow gets an injury or something happens that if fluky things happen in the NFL, we never know. But their odds of this happening are not good. Their odds of squeaking into the playoffs are hard, and it's going to be hard enough to get a wild card spot in this crowded AFC. You're talking about potentially the best division in football this year,
Right.
Shane. And I think that, and you look at those three Pro Bowl quarterbacks ahead of them, two MVP caliber quarterbacks ahead of them. At least Lamar was in the past. And I think Joe Burrow could be that guy right now. That's going to be a lot to overcome when so much emphasis is placed on that, and so much of your team's success depends on the quarterback. Like, we really got to be confident that Kenny Pickett is going to get this team to 11 plus wins in order to have a chance of that happening. I'm not putting money on the Steelers winning the division this year. However, I will tell you this: I placed money on the Steelers not to finish fourth in their AFC North last year, and I won a good chunk of change from that because I felt very confident
Yeah.
that Tomlin was, again, going to get his team to at least that 500 mark. I didn't feel confident with what the Browns had going on. I predicted them to be the last in the division. They were by a couple of games. And so if you are to place a bet, one that's safer, much safer, not as good of a payout, but a much safer bet than the division winner, is placing the Steelers not to finish last, which is one of those prop bets that you can make. And if you want to get real tricky with it, you can go right across the AFC, Shane, and predict this landing spot that each team is going to be. Like,
Right.
if I were to just say it right now, I would say Bengals, Ravens, Steelers, Browns. I think it's going to finish in that order this year. So if you're a betting person, put $1 on it, see what happens.
Yeah, why not?
Shane, let's go to some player odds now.
Yeah.
And some of these are pretty obscure, but I want to talk about them anyway, because I think the fans will find them interesting. Let's talk about Kenny Pickett's MVP odds. Plus 4,500. I would have thought they would have been way lower than that.
That's
like
the
plus
thing about
10,000.
this.
Like,
That's the interesting thing about this is like Because I think he's what, is it 16th?
16th. He's 16th in the NFL in MVP odds, which is kind of odd because I feel like you
Yeah.
can fire off 16 quarterbacks alone who should have better
That's
MVP odds than that.
that's the thing that's interesting. I mean, so here's the problem. I think if they hired someone else to coordinate this offense this offseason, and you looked at how Kenny handled himself down the stretch, you could talk yourself into him ranking around here because he has some rushing upside. He gets some rushing touchdowns. Like, the Steelers are probably going to be a good football team. That helps a lot too. It
Mhm.
doesn't make a lot of sense to me, just like from the outside looking in, because even if he plays better than even the 16th best quarterback, I don't think it's going to result, like, the results are going to be good enough statistically to put him into even the 16th best MVP odds. Like, it's just very weird that they have him here, because maybe it's because they assume they for this offense to work, he's going to have to do a lot of it himself, and like Matt Canada won't matter as
Mhm.
much as he should. Maybe other than that, I really don't like, just statistically, I don't think he's going to make a big enough jump almost by design. And that's kind of the problem, is that he's not going to be put in a position very likely to put up big numbers, even if he executes everything perfectly. So it's just, yeah, it's asking a lot. I mean, this is one of the ones you do for fun if you're just like, let's, just want to whatever. But yeah, this is a bet that you probably don't need to make. There's probably even guys down the board that have a higher shot than him. So
Yeah, and I think this is more of Vegas just playing that line, Shayne, and say we want bettors on both sides. So we want to bet
yes.
we want guys betting this will happen, and people that are betting that. And so I think that's kind of where they set the line. Like, if the odds are too good, like if they did like plus 10,000 odds and they aren't trusting that this isn't going to happen, they don't want to lose a
Right.
bunch
They
of
don't
money.
lose a
And
bunch
so
of money. Yeah.
if he makes the Trevor Lawrence jump or something
Right, or
insane like
whatever.
that.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably why they have the line set. I don't know if they were to, I don't think that they probably believe that he is truly the 16th most likely player to win the award, but it's a matter of playing that line and getting money
Yeah.
on both sides of the line. So it is interesting where they have the odds and some of the players that he is ahead of on that. And I have to pull up that list here, but there were some names that I thought, I'm like, this is interesting that they have him so high in comparison to other guys. And so plus 4,500. I'll tell you right now, just knowing what I know about betting stuff and doing this for a little while now, the odds aren't worth the potential payout here because this is going to Patrick Mahomes or it's going to Joe Burrow or
It's going
Josh
to
Allen. Like,
some of the top.
it's
It's
going to
just one of them.
somebody that's going to have a high volume passing offense, and that offense is not the Steelers. Unless
Exactly.
Pittsburgh
Yeah.
can decide that they can't play defense and they can't run the football, then first of all, your team's probably not going to have a good enough record to be in
Right.
consideration
Yeah.
anyway.
Unfortunately.
And secondly, if you're playing just come from behind football, I don't know if that's going to get you the votes that you need. It's going to take a lot of volume. And I really think it's just going to come down to a handful of names on that list. Like, I think that the other two that can get inserted there are Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence as potential MVPs because they're going to be from high volume passing offenses and they're already really good football players. So if you are to bet on MVP, I would go with one of the safer bets here. Maybe one of those fourth or fifth name on that list where you can get a little bit better odds if you want to take a little bit of a gamble. Patrick Mahomes is the obvious name, and I think he is just a generational football player, and I wouldn't be
Exactly.
surprised if he
Yeah.
won it again. So,
Yeah.
but can he pick it MVP odds? No, I'm not taking that bet. Shayne, let's move on to the next one here. And that is Najee Harris to win Offensive Player of the Year. Now, those of you who aren't aware of the difference, MVP is the overall best player, typically goes to a quarterback. Offensive Player of the Year,
Yeah.
traditionally, yes, not always. Traditionally, Offensive Player of the Year typically goes to a skill player, a running back, receiver, or tight end. So that's still very, very difficult. There's a lot of good football players out there at each of their respective positions. Like, you need to be better than Najee needs to be better as a running back than Travis Kelce is as a tight end. You need to be better than Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase or whoever else Tyreek Hill would be as a receiver. And so in order to do these things, you're going to need a ton of volume. You're going to have to put up great numbers, and you're still going to have to be relatively efficient to the point where people are like, yeah, you are an X factor. You're a difference maker. I like this one better than the Kenny Pickett vote because MVP is just so hard.
Yeah.
I know that you're still going against a lot of names here, Shayne, but theoretically, the Steelers are trying to run the football. Their goal is to run the football 40 plus times a game. Najee's going to have a big hand in that. If the offensive line can really take a big step forward, then perhaps he can jump those stats, at least in their conversation where it's like, oh yeah, you had 1,300 rushing yards and 14 touchdowns. You're in that conversation at this point. So what do you make of the plus 5,000 odds for Najee Harris to win Offensive Player of the Year?
So like you said, this is one where I think if you wanted to throw a couple bucks on just because, and it's okay, you're okay with losing whatever it is you spend.
Yeah.
This is a much better Hail Mary bet because again, as you
Mhm.
alluded to, if everything goes according to plan, the the most productive player on this football team is going to be Najee Harris. Like that's going to be what happens if everything goes according to plan. Between rushing, I think they're hoping to get more out of him as a receiver, which I think he's totally capable of. I just wonder if they'll be able to use him well enough to do that, but that's beside the point. But he should be
Yeah.
the most productive player on this football team offensively if what they're building right now with the offensive line and what it seems like they want to do takes place. So he would be the guy to bet on winning one of these awards. Like you said, though, I think the problem is going to be just the sheer amounts of skill talent that's out there on offenses that are better established. Whether it's Justin
Mhm.
Jefferson, Cooper Kupp coming back, if Stafford or whoever plays quarterback can get him the ball enough. Other running backs, Nick Chubb doesn't really have the receiving chops, so maybe he doesn't get in there, but we've seen Derrick Henry put up 2,000-yard seasons, and if he does something like that again, which unlikely at his age, but if he does something like that, he's going to win it,
Mhm.
like he just is. So it's really hard to break into that top 5-ish group, but it's not impossible because we see things change year over year, changing in the guard in terms of who the top running backs are and receivers. So this is at least possible. Still not a good bet to
Mhm.
make in terms of like if you're going to put a lot of money on somebody, want to probably put on one of those top guys. But this is at least one that you can put a couple dollars on and say, maybe it'll happen.
Yeah, and you don't have to have an elite offense necessarily to win this, like
No,
Derrick
you do
Henry,
not.
where
Right.
your passing game can be blah, and,
Yeah.
your running
Yeah,
game is
this is
really
very
good.
much
So
personal achievement here about what you did individually.
yeah, it really is. And I think the biggest factor here, honestly, Shane, it's gonna come down to Jalen Warren. Like, how big of
Yeah,
a
how
bite of
much
the
does he
apple
cut
does he take
into? Yeah.
in that offense? Yeah, and if the answer is Jalen Warren's carving out 30% of the snaps, I don't think that Najee will probably end up getting big enough volume this year to get those numbers, to have the 1,500 rushing yards. And again, we're on the really high end here. I mean,
Yes.
Najee hasn't done that yet. He's had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, but if we're talking about jumping from 1,000 yards or 1,100 yards up to 1,500 yards and 15, 18 touchdowns, whatever it would take to be in contention for Offensive Player of the Year, that's a big jump. And it's why the
Yes.
odds are set where they are. It's why it's plus 5,000 odds. You win pretty good money. You put some money down on this. So I in terms of comparing it to the Kenny Pickett bet versus this, I agree with you. The Najee bet is a lot better to make. It's a lot safer bet. And again, based on the Steelers' game plan and how they want to do things, they want to run the ball well. They want to run the ball effectively in the red zone. And so knowing that, the opportunity should be there, and we'll see what Najee does with it. I think this is, at the very least, Shane, a reasonable bet to make.
Right.
He's a lot lower than a lot of other players who I think that he should be higher than on this
Right.
list. So you can check that out for yourself. But I do think that this one might be worth throwing $1 or $2 at. It's not likely at all.
No, it's not.
You're still more likely to go with probably one of those high end receivers or a Travis Kelce, or even if the running back position, a Christian McCaffrey. A sneaky one this year, Shane, is Tony Pollard with no Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah, it's just
Behind
weird.
Dallas's
Honestly,
offensive
I
line.
want to see how he looks knee
So
wise, like with his leg and
he's
everything.
got to get healthy again.
Yeah.
But he was very explosive last year, and
Extremely
so
explosive. Yeah.
if you want to do one a little bit of under the radar one, that's a good bet. Just the like I said, volume wise, the volume should be there if the Steelers can execute their game plan. So it's worth throwing something at least. Defensive Player of the Year. Obviously, TJ Watt is the highest odds among Steelers players. For what it's worth, Minkah Fitzpatrick plus 10,000 odds. If you think that Minkah is just going to go
Have
off
like
this
9
year and have like one of
interceptions or
those,
something.
like a 9-pick year and takes 2 to the house or whatever, it just seems like the NFL has had such a hard time giving these two defensive backs recently, and even more than that, safeties. Like safeties
Yeah.
earning these awards since like Ed Reed and Polamalu. It's been very scarce. So
Yeah, I think that the last defensive back was Stephon Gilmore, maybe a
it
couple
was
years ago,
Gilmore,
right? I think
in a
so.
year that Watt should have won it, I thought. But
Realistically, yeah,
yeah,
but that's beside the point. But I think he was the last one, and he had a special corner season, which is a little different. But
yes, and even Shane, we're talking about the even the corner season. Like 2 years ago, Trayvon Diggs had 11 interceptions. and he still
Right.
only came in like third or fourth in
I
MVP
think
voting.
people
I'd have
kind
to,
of
or
realize though that like
DPOY.
it was very much a pick merchant year and not a like
There,
he's just that good. So
yeah,
like,
yeah. There's
you know
one
what
of
I
those
mean?
things. I think
Yeah.
it's the blend of establishing yourself, having the consistency, and then also exploding for a big year like that.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yeah.
Minka theoretically having 3 first team all pros, if he has just an explosive season, it's possible, but it's much more likely to go to a pass rusher, which is why TJ Watt has plus 850 odds. I like this bet, Shayne. I mean, this is fourth best odds among defensive player of the year this year. And again, if we're looking at the last time TJ Watt was healthy, I thought his best season came in 2020. Not even his
Record breaking
league tying,
season.
yes,
Yeah.
sack year, 22 and a half sacks in 2021. If you remember in that year, he was dealing with hip, knee, and groin
All sorts of
injuries
stuff was going on.
reoccurring
Yeah.
throughout the season. 2020 was really the last time we saw Watt at full strength, and he was just a force to be reckoned with. Still led the league in sacks that year, only with 15, but I thought he was a better and more consistent player in every other area because he
Right.
was healthy and strong. And so if he comes back, if he returns to that, I like TJ Watt at plus 850 odds to win defensive player of the year. Throw $10 on it, see if you can win 85. That's kind of my motto here. It's like I think I know, Shayne, that TJ Watt, the player that he is, he's a good enough player to make this happen. He's a good enough player to repeat this award, just like, I mean, not to the level of his brother, but he is on that Hall of Fame track. He's got that fire. He's going to do everything in his power to I mean, obviously try to take this team to Super Bowl, but earn as many accolades as he can because he knows that he can go down as one of the all-time greats for this team. So I like that bet at plus 850. What say you about this?
I will be betting on this at some point. I don't know when yet, but
Mm-hmm.
there will be money put on this to happen. So if that tells you anything, as you said, this is a guy who's won the award before, could have won it twice realistically,
Yeah.
at least twice. He is a great bet to be one of the most productive players in the sport when he's healthy. It doesn't matter, you can look at, all the analytics of pass rushing, and those are very important. But if you're just talking about production, which is the end game of the defensive player of the year voting for the most part, he is going to be up there if he's healthy. Just he is super productive, whether it's sacks, forced fumbles, pass deflections from the defensive line, which is hilarious when he does that. It cracks me up every time. He's definitely learned that from JJ. But it just he's going to be one of those guys that he just solely because of production. It doesn't matter like if you one of those guys thinks, oh, the 4 guys who had a better pass rush win rate or whatever. Like I understand that that's important, but we're talking about defensive player of the year voting. It's going to be about production. So you have to at least keep him in your sights there. I think it's a really good bet to make, and I'm about the revenge tour if it happens. That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to put some money on that one as well, Shayne. And if you want to hedge your bets a little bit here, folks, what you can do, if you just want to make a little bit of money, place a few dollars on Parsons, Watt, Bosa, Garrett. And if you do that, I mean, I don't think that anybody else is winning MVP outside of those 4. Like, I'd be really surprised if somebody emerged.
Yeah.
Aaron Donald obviously still could. I mean, he's still a very good football player.
There's just not
Not
a
the
lot
same
of
as he was
talent on
before.
that group. It's going to be hard
No,
for him
and that's the
to
other thing
yeah.
is the rest of his team is going to be holding him back.
That's the problem.
So if you're a believer that one of those 4 is going to win it, you can hedge your bet and make some of that betting money back a little bit. If you are really confident that one of those 4 will win it, because the odds play out that if you do that, you'll make at least some money by betting the collection of the 4. I do like Watt though at plus 850. Nick Bosa to repeat is at plus 1200. So Watt's odds are pretty significantly better than Bosa's are this year. And again, assuming Watt is healthy, I think that they should be better too. I think the Steelers are going to have a solid defense. Not that the 49ers won't. Their defense was the best in the league last year.
There
so
might be a situation with that team now, especially as they brought Hargrave in. Is he going to even need to put up the statistics he did last year? Is it going to be something where he's going to be the biggest piece on that defensive front, but he's going to have so much help, he might just not get the statistics he had last year because the other guys kind of feast on it too. So.
And that could be the case. And Shayne, I have to admit, one bet that I've already placed, and I'll put that out there for you all right now, is I have Micah Parsons as Defensive Player of the Year winner. I have him at plus 650 odds. He's been a 2-time All-Pro, first 2 years in the NFL. He's just really good. And I think that if Dallas's defense continues to play at the level that they can play at, I think that he'll be certainly in contention for that. And he's been
very
healthy
good bet
too.
to make,
so
very good.
played in all 17 games last year. All right, let's move on to the next one here, Shayne, and that is offensive rookie of the year. The Steelers don't have many strong candidates for this. I mean, this is likely to go to a receiver, a running back, more likely, probably Bijan. I mean, has the best odds of winning that
Yeah, to me, it's
award.
Bijan or whoever the best quarterback is from this
Yeah,
year. One of those two, probably.
That's probably what it's going to end up being. Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and Anthony Richardson all lead that, and then Bijan is right there as well. So it's going to be one of those four likely, but I wanted to throw the odds out here for you anyway. Darnell Washington is really the only Steelers player that makes sense here in terms of rookies go, and plus 6,000 odds. Don't do it, folks. I want to see I want to see him give him some time, and we'll see what happens here in a couple of years. But this is a blocking tight end first. This is a team that already has a very good receiving tight end, probably one of the top 5 or 6 receiving tight ends in the NFL right now in Pat Freiermuth. So don't place this bet. I know it's tempting with plus 6,000 odds. It would give you something to look forward to, but the volume's just not going to be there.
Yeah, if they had ever given this award to an offensive lineman, maybe I'd be more willing to bet, because I think Darnell's going to have more of an impact in that part of the game that an offensive lineman normally would than being a pass catcher. Now, could he get some like red zone touchdowns because he's a million feet tall and fat, whatever? Like, sure, that's possible, but it's not going to be, 10 or something crazy that would allow him to be in the conversation. He's not going to catch 50 balls. It's just, if he does, it means Pat Freiermuth had something happen to him, which is already bad anyway. And then I don't care if I made this bet anyway, but it's just not save it. Maybe down the line, he might be in contention for stuff if he can break out as even a tight end, like the true inline tight end. But yeah, let him just find his role first this year. Then we'll talk about it.
It would quite literally, Shayne, have to be Freiermuth goes down in week 1. He's out for the season. And Washington plays the rest of the year, and he gets enough volume. Because even Freiermuth himself, he's not going to get enough volume compared to the very top. He's not compared to Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce to be in consideration for the very top of his position. So Washington won't either, even if something happened to Freiermuth. Avoid that bet, but that doesn't mean that Washington can't be a good player. He might surprise us. And I mean, we like Washington a lot. We're very pleased with where the Steelers were able to get him in the 93rd overall pick. It's just give the guy some time. He's a young player. He still has a lot of technical things to work on, and he's always going to be more of that Y tight end, the blocker first, receiver second type player. Still could be a very valuable piece, but will not be the offensive rookie of the year, barring something crazy happening. Let's move on to defensive rookie of the year. This one makes a little bit more sense, Shayne. Joey Porter is the top candidate. Also, Steelers have Keanu Benton, who's not listed among the odds. You can probably scrape down and find him somewhere. But Joey Porter Jr., this is going to come down to, boy, the guy needs a lot of opportunity, and I'm just not sure how fast that opportunity is going to come, Shayne. Like if Levi Wallace wasn't there, or if he was able to beat him out and be just the starting corner from day one, then I like the odds better. But also what's going to hurt him is he might not be like a Tariq Woolen season. You're not going to have the guy that's probably going to get 4 to 6 interceptions. It's just not, it's something that Porter has not done historically.
It's not his
game. He had one pick in 4 seasons in college. So he can be a good player and yet not earn enough love in the defensive rookie of the year voting. Is this a bet that you would take or avoid?
So I'm going to avoid it mostly because unless you are a Sauce Gardner type, which granted his game is closer to what he does than he is to Tariq Woolen or some of the ball hawking types, right?
Yeah, it is.
But unless you are not only a elite rookie corner, but an elite corner in the NFL period right off the gate, you're probably just not going to win this award as a defensive back. One, because again, you either have to make a ton of plays, even if you're not great in coverage, and hope that the other guys in the league didn't do anything special as rookies, or you have to be a Sauce Gardner who literally shut down half of the field for his entire rookie season. He had a lot of pass breakups, but not a lot of picks or anything like that. Nothing crazy. So it's just going to be hard, especially because the depth of this class and the strength of this class was the edge rushing group, right? Like those guys are probably like the defensive rookie of the year is probably coming from that group. It could be Will Anderson, could be any of the other pass rushers, could even be probably not because of the fact he won't have to play that much here, but Jalen Carter, like guys like that are the premium defensive talent in this class that were in the either interior pass rush or the edge. They're just going to have a leg up because if they can have even 7 or 8 sacks and be a starting edge
Mhm.
rusher. Like that's good enough to win this award usually over a corner that even if he starts the whole year, unless you make a ton of plays, you better be one of the top cover corners and everybody's got to know you're the top cover corner. Like it's not as simple as playing better than expected. You got to really go above and beyond to win this award as a corner.
Yeah, for sure. And like some of the names you already mentioned on there, Will Anderson, Jalen Carter. I mean, Carter, plug Carter into an already super talented Eagles defense, now
He could get some
replacing
statistics
Devon
for sure.
Hargrave with Fletcher Cox and other players, 2 full rotations of guys next to him. I mean, there's just other players I would definitely bet on
Right.
more. And like we said, we don't know for sure that Porter is going to be a full-time player for the Steelers from the gate. It could take
Right.
a little bit. And so if that doesn't come until the second half of the season, then he's already behind the 8 ball there in terms of his chances. And these are odds, honestly, that you'll probably see get worse as the season goes on before they get better. So at one point he might drop down to like plus 4,000 odds because if he's not playing enough. And then maybe that point, no, it's still not because you're not going to get over it. It's not worth taking, honestly.
The path just isn't clear, right? You have to have a clear path to make a bet like this, and I just don't see it right now.
If the one thing I will say is that if you really like placing these bets, if you see that the Steelers are announcing that Joey Porter is a week 1 starter and you want to take a shot on that, go for it. I still don't believe in him being a guy that's going to get 3-4 interceptions as a rookie. Or maybe not at any point in his career. He's just not the type of player that he is. He's more of, like you said, the lockdown man cover corner. He's not the take the ball away type of corner historically. But if he ends up starting from week 1, you want to place a bet on it, go ahead. Otherwise, I would say avoid that one. All right, Shane, just a couple more here before we wrap up the show. Most rushing yards in the NFL this year. This kind of goes a little bit with the offensive player of the year, but now you're talking about just running backs. And so you don't have to worry about the elite receivers, the elite tight ends getting in the way. This is possible. And I think this is why the odds are set at plus 3,000, which is still a quality payout. I don't mind this actually, Shane, because I think that there is a chance. Now, the biggest thing when it comes to who's going to lead the league in rushing yards, it always comes down to health. If Najee can play a 17-game season and Derrick Henry gets banged up for a few games, Nick Chubb gets banged up for a few, and McCaffrey get banged up for a few, you're already right there. It takes some fortunate luck on your end and some bad luck on the end of other players who are some of the top players at their position. What's that going to look like? I don't know. It varies from year to year. It could be 1,400 yards. It could be 1,800 yards. And if it's 1,800 yards, it's not going to be Najee. But I think that if it's closer to that 1,400 yard mark, there is a chance that he could obtain this. It's going to come down to, like we said already before when we talked about him, the quantity of carries he's going to get and his ability to stay healthy and stay on the field. So what do you think about Najee at plus 3,000 to lead the league in rushing?
I think of the Hail Mary-ish type bets that we talked about today, this is the one that I'd be willing to put the most money on if I had to spend money on a bet, because again, the path is there. And this is the key thing when you're making bets like this. And obviously we're not like a betting podcast, but we both have experience betting. And if you're making a bet like this, you want to make sure there's a clear path to it being possible. It doesn't have to be likely, especially if you're just throwing some like 10, 15 bucks on something like this, but there has to be a reasonable expectation that it's possible. And I think because of what we expect this team to do offensively, we know they want to run the ball. They want to run this offense through the running backs and primarily Najee, most likely. This is possible. Now, I think that there's definitely at least 4 guys right off the top of my head that if they're healthy, have a better shot of winning this award, or not winning this award, but getting the most rushing yards ahead of him. It's a healthy Derrick Henry, healthy Jonathan Taylor with Anthony Richardson at quarterback with that run game. I think it'd be very interesting. Could open things up for him. You look at a guy like Nick Chubb when he's healthy. And really the only other guy as far as volume that I could see maybe getting there, weirdly enough, and you talked about him because of the lack of depth at this position now for them, unless they were to bring Elliott back or something. Tony Pollard, if he's healthy, could be a guy that could win this because again, his explosiveness, he might not need quite as many carries as some of the other guys to get up into that stratosphere rushing yards wise. So those guys are definitely, I think, have a better chance, but Najee's going to be put in a position most likely to be given the opportunity to win this, right? It just comes down to whether he plays well enough and whether the offensive line can allow him the space to win this type of thing.
Yeah, if you want a safer bet that still is pretty good payout here is Tony Pollard at plus 1,600 to win this. And so the payout is roughly half as good, but I think it's twice as likely that it ends up happening. Now, the top
There's a
names on
track
the
record
list,
there. Yeah.
yeah, there is. And you just saw what he did last year, like the explosive play rate and everything. Like he can chunk off yards in a hurry. And not having Elliott there is definitely going to give him a little bit of a boost. Nick Chubb, Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry are the top three, plus 450, plus 650, and plus 650. So their odds are their payout is significantly less than Najee's would be.
Right.
Obviously, if Najee ends up if he ends up winning the rushing title, then you're getting a lot bigger chunk in
Yes.
return. Yeah. But it's also because it's less likely to happen, I think. And the Steelers, they've got to be diligent with that running game. And again, Shane, I got to point to it. I think that Najee has to look like he is heads and shoulders better than Jaylen Warren, because if that doesn't happen in year three, and as impressive as Warren was as a rookie, if they come out here looking like 1A and 1B at the running back position, it's just not going to happen because you're not going to get
the volume won't be there. Yeah.
So let's go to our next one here, and that is the most sacks, Shane. Again, you can bet that I'll be placing a bet on this one as well.
Yeah.
Watt has led the league in sacks twice in his career already. And he would have had a chance, I think, to probably make it 3 years in a row. I mean, he's a good enough player too. But he did it when he wasn't healthy, and he tied the NFL sack record when he was playing through injuries and missed 2 games, Shane. So to bet against him here, I think would be silly. You're talking about a player still in the prime of his career. I think that it's very attainable still. And so I know that, I mean, you look at any one particular player, it could be anybody can go off at any given moment. It can be a Robert Quinn, and a guy that just comes out of nowhere and puts up 20 sacks. But I like the odds here, and I'm going to place a bet on this because I think that it's something that if Watt is healthy, it can happen again. He's already done it twice. He's done it in the last 2 seasons. He's been remotely healthy, and I think he can do it a third time.
Yeah, and I think the main reason why I think you have to make this bet, if you're a betting person in general, is not just the track record of 2 times leading league in sacks, which is just hard to do in this era of pass rushers, like with the passing going on, everything else. But this is a guy that, like, regardless of what you think about him as a true edge rusher in terms of just ability to win on the edge consistently, there is a relentlessness to his game that you can't really quantify on a week-to-week basis, where there's sacks that he gets that aren't necessarily him just straight up beating tackles, beating guys inside. Like, it's about the fact that if you are still holding onto the football against the Steelers, there is a 99% chance that TJ Watt is close to you. Like, that's just kind of what it is. Like, from a production standpoint, the man just unmatched. He's always around the football in some capacity. He's knocking the ball out. Like, it's just because of the way he plays, he's going to naturally get more opportunities to sack the quarterback, regardless of his win rate, whether it's elite, whether it's just highly above average, like it usually is, but maybe not at the top of the league. Like, he just is going to be around, and that's why he's a good bet for this type of award, because unlike a lot of other pass rushers, he's consistently up there in sacks because, again, not only does he get those wins, he also just hangs around and he's always right behind the quarterback, it seems like, when they're running around. Like, it's just kind of how he plays, and that's why he's the best. And honestly, I think he's the best bet when he's healthy at any year, honestly.
Yeah, and that's why there's all these advanced statistics out there right now, Shane. If you're just looking at who is the best pass rusher in the league that's going to get to the quarterback in 2 seconds or less, then Watt's name probably isn't at the very top of the list. That's where you get Micah Parsons and Myles Garrett. Those guys can do that very effectively. But if that play continues at all, you're talking about one of the best effort players in the NFL who has
just
fantastic
a finisher. He finishes
technique.
Plays.
And so regardless of how some of these sacks, call them low quality sacks if you want to, for some of them, that's fine. He's still making plays. He's still making impacts. He's still punching the ball out of the ball carrier's hand. And so this is something that I think is likely to happen if he plays a 17-game season.
Even a 15 or 16-game season. We've seen it happen before.
He's done it before. He's done it before with 15 games. So it can happen again, even if he doesn't play. But if he's healthy, like he has been in the past, then I see no reason not to put a few dollars on this one to say, yeah, he can absolutely do that. Above him on the list, Nick Bosa, Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons. I like Watt at plus 850 better than any of those names. I might like Watt straight up, honestly, Shane, better than those names at lesser odds. So, because I think it's something that can happen again. One more here before Shane and I sign off today, and that is the odds of the Pittsburgh Steelers to make the playoffs this year are at plus 130, which means that Vegas has them kind of on the outside looking in right now. So if you were to bet them to make the playoffs, the payout is better if you bet them to payout for you is better if they make the playoffs than if they miss the playoffs. So Shane, how do you, I mean, it's not a big difference here, but how do you have this one going and what do you think is going to happen?
So I decided before, like once our off season was pretty much done, right? Like once we were at this point where training camp's going to be starting soon, I told myself that if whatever's like betting sites have plus odds on them making the playoffs, that's going to get a bet from me because I do expect this team to sneak into the playoffs in some form or fashion. I'm not sure how they do it. I'm not sure exactly what record they're going to get to do it. But I can't take a team that very nearly made the playoffs last year with all the things that were going on, the way they started the season, rookie quarterback, all that stuff. I'm not going to assume that they're not going to make that last little bit, extra step to get into the playoffs after everything they've done this offseason. Is it still totally possible that because of the strength of the division, the AFC, all that, is it still possible? Of course it's possible. That's why their odds are where they are. But I'm not going to miss out on plus odds for this team to make the playoffs, considering what we've seen them do since the end of last season.
Yeah, that's my mindset as well, Shane, is you've got positive odds here. If we're looking at like minus 175, minus 200,
I would probably
it's not worth taking at that point.
Yeah, we'll just not worry about it.
But there's so much riding on this. Like Mike Tomlin needs another playoff win. I know that despite his reputation and everything, this team cannot just have a 6+ year drought without a playoff victory, not even just a playoff appearance. So getting in is one thing, winning a game is another thing in itself. And they haven't been in the tournament as much as they need to be either. And so I think with all the roster changes, with the projected improvements of mostly across the board on offense this year compared to what we saw last year, TJ Watt returning healthy, there's just a lot of factors. And I know that the AFC is tough. It's super crowded, and you're going to get teams that land in those other 2 wildcard spots that'll probably have a better quarterback than we do, just the way that it's going to work out. But to bet against the Steelers making the playoffs, if I were just to bet them at even odds, I would bet over and that they would get in. And so having plus odds like this, it's not a big payout, but I would put some money on that. I think it's got to happen this year, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on a lot of people, I think, if it doesn't. And so I like them to make the playoffs, not to win the division, but to sneak in there as that 9-8, maybe 10-7 team and wrap up one of those wild card spots. And it'll probably come down to the wire, just like it did last year. And it may even need a few other factors going their way in the final couple of weeks of the season. But I think this is something that has to happen. I think that Mike Tomlin senses the pressure this year. He knows he's got to get into that tournament. And so I would take that bet. All right. Thank you for joining us today on the show. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain podcast. And thanks for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.